The bitter wind howled through the Colorado mountains on that December night in 1878, and Catherine Dalton stood at the edge of her family's ranch with her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, watching the last wagon disappear into the darkness. Her father was dead. Her mother was dead. And her brother had just taken everything that mattered, selling the cattle and horses out from under her, leaving her with nothing but the shell of a homestead and debts she could never repay. The tears came hot and fast, streaming down her cheeks, and within moments they crystallized in the freezing air, tiny ice formations clinging to her skin as she stood there trembling. Catherine was 21 years old, and she had never felt more alone in her entire life. The ranch house behind her was dark and cold, the firewood nearly gone, and she had no idea how she would survive the winter. Her brother Thomas had always been cruel, always been jealous of the love their parents showed her, but she never imagined he would do something like this. He had forged documents, claimed the ranch was his alone to manage after their father's passing, and by the time Catherine discovered what he had done, everything was already gone. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thin shawl doing nothing against the mountain cold. The stars overhead were brilliant and merciless, beautiful and indifferent to her suffering. She thought about walking into the woods and never coming back. She thought about letting the cold take her, letting the winter claim her the way it claimed everything else that was weak and unprepared. That was when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Catherine turned, her frozen tears still clinging to her cheeks, and saw a rider emerging from the tree line. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low, his coat collar turned up against the wind. As he drew closer, she could see he was leading 2 pack horses behind him, both laden with supplies. He slowed his horse to a walk as he approached, and in the dim starlight she could make out his features, weathered and handsome, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice deep and measured. "This the Dalton place?" Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. She wiped at her face, forgetting about the frozen tears, and winced as the ice crystals scraped against her skin. The stranger dismounted smoothly, his boots crunching in the snow. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the easy confidence of a man who had spent his entire life outdoors. He took a step closer, and his eyes narrowed with concern as he looked at her face. "You are hurt," he said, but it was not quite a question. "I am fine," Catherine managed to say, though her voice cracked. "What brings you to our ranch?" "Name is Zachary Young," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I was supposed to meet with Douglas Dalton about purchasing some horses. I sent word 3 weeks ago that I would arrive tonight." Catherine felt her heart sink even further. "My father is dead," she said flatly. "Died 2 weeks past from pneumonia, and my brother sold all the horses yesterday. There is nothing here for you." Zachary was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the starlight. Then he took another step closer, close enough that she could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes. Without a word, he reached up and gently touched her cheek where the frozen tears still clung to her skin. "Your tears have frozen," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made Catherine want to cry all over again. He leaned in slowly, deliberately, and pressed his lips to her cheek, kissing away the frozen tears with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man so rough and weathered. He moved to her other cheek, his warm breath melting the ice, his lips soft against her cold skin. When he pulled back, he looked directly into her eyes and said with absolute conviction, "No more sadness." Catherine stared at him, unable to speak. This stranger, this man she had never met before, had just shown her more kindness than her own brother had shown in years. Fresh tears welled up in her eyes, but before they could fall, Zachary pulled her into his arms, wrapping his heavy coat around her shoulders. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. And standing there in the cold mountain night, wrapped in the warmth of a stranger's coat, Catherine told him everything. She told him about her father's death, about her mother dying the year before from influenza, about her brother's betrayal and theft. She told him about the debts, about the empty barn, about how she had no way to survive the winter and nowhere to go. Zachary listened without interrupting, his arms steady around her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could feel his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. "How much is owed?" he asked finally. $300 to the bank," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "Due by the end of January." "Thomas took all the money from the cattle and horse sales. I do not know where he went, but he is gone." Zachary nodded slowly. "And the ranch itself, the land, is it in your name or your brother's?" "Both," Catherine said. "My father left it to both of us together. But Thomas convinced me to sign papers. I thought they were just for managing the finances after father died, but they gave him control of everything. He cannot sell the land without my signature, but he can strip it bare and leave me with nothing but the debt." "So you still own half this land," Zachary said thoughtfully. "And the house, and whatever is left." "Which is nothing," Catherine said bitterly. "The house is falling apart. There is barely any firewood, no food, no animals, just land and debt." Zachary was quiet again, and then he stepped back, looking at her seriously. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Dalton. It may sound strange coming from a man you just met, but hear me out." Catherine waited, too tired and heartbroken to feel much of anything anymore. "I have been looking for land in this area for 2 years," Zachary said. "Good grazing land near water with access to the trail routes. Your father's ranch is exactly what I need. I have money saved, enough to pay off your debts and buy supplies for the winter. I also have horses, 10 of them waiting in White River, and cattle connections throughout Colorado and Wyoming." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What I propose is this. I pay off your debts and we work this ranch together. Equal partners. I provide the animals and the expertise, you provide the land and the local knowledge. We build this place back up together, and we split everything 50-50. Catherine stared at him. "Why would you do that? You could just wait until the bank forecloses and buy the land for less." "Because that is not the kind of man I am," Zachary said simply. "And because I saw a woman standing alone in the freezing cold with tears frozen on her face, and I cannot walk away from that. Call it foolish if you want, but my mother raised me better." Something in Catherine's chest loosened slightly, a tiny spark of hope flickering to life. "I do not even know you," she said. "How do I know you are not like my brother, that you will not just take everything and leave?" "You do not know," Zachary admitted. "But I give you my word, and I am willing to put it in writing, legal and binding, drawn up by a lawyer in White River. Equal partners, everything split down the middle. If you want, we can even include a clause that says if I try to cheat you, the entire ranch becomes yours alone." Catherine wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Why would you offer such generous terms?" she asked suspiciously. Zachary met her eyes steadily. "Because I have been where you are, Miss Dalton. Not quite the same circumstances, but close enough. 5 years ago, my father lost our family ranch in Wyoming to a crooked business partner who forged documents and stole everything we had built. My father died of a broken heart 6 months later, and my mother followed him a year after that. I swore then that I would never let something like that happen to someone else if I had the power to prevent it." He gestured to the ranch around them. "I have the money and the skills to make this place profitable again. You have the land and the legal right to it. Together, we can build something good here. Apart, we both lose. You lose your home, and I lose the opportunity to finally have land of my own again." Catherine studied his face in the starlight, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was honest sincerity and a kind of quiet strength that made her want to trust him despite her fears. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Zachary said. "But while you think, let me at least get a fire started in that house and make sure you do not freeze to death tonight. I have supplies on the pack horses, including food and firewood. Consider it payment for letting me stable my horses in your barn for the night." Catherine wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of pride, but she was so cold and so tired that she simply nodded. Zachary retrieved his horses and led them to the barn, and Catherine was surprised to find it was not quite as empty as she thought. There was still hay in the loft, probably not worth the effort for Thomas to haul away, and the structure itself was sound. Zachary made quick work of unsaddling the horses and getting them settled, talking to them in low, soothing tones that made Catherine feel oddly comforted. Then he grabbed supplies from the pack horses and followed her into the dark house. Within 30 minutes, Zachary had a roaring fire going in the main room and was cooking bacon and beans over the flames. Catherine sat wrapped in blankets, watching him work with quiet efficiency. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent years on the trail, someone who knew how to take care of himself and others. "Where are you from originally?" Catherine asked, her voice still hoarse from crying. "Born in Wyoming near Laramie," Zachary said, stirring the pot. "Worked cattle drives for 3 years after we lost the ranch, saved every penny I could. Worked as a ranch hand, a horsebreaker, even did some scouting for the Army for a while. Been looking for the right piece of land to start fresh ever since. And you really think this place is worth saving?" Catherine asked, looking around at the shabby interior of the house. "I think every place is worth saving if it is home to someone," Zachary said quietly. "And I think you are a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. You could have given up, walked away, but you are still here." That tells me something. They ate in companionable silence, and Catherine could not remember the last time simple food had tasted so good. After dinner, Zachary insisted she take the bedroom while he slept by the fire. Catherine protested weakly, but she was so exhausted that she eventually gave in. As she lay in her old bed, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the next room, Catherine thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 12 hours ago, she had been ready to give up entirely. Now, there was a stranger sleeping in her main room who had offered her a lifeline, and she had no idea if she should take it. But she remembered the gentle way he had kissed away her frozen tears. She remembered the absolute conviction in his voice when he said, "No more sadness." And she remembered the honest sincerity in his eyes when he told her about his own family's loss. Maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Catherine woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment she thought she had dreamed the entire previous night. But when she walked into the main room, there was Zachary, already dressed and making breakfast as if he had lived there his entire life. "Morning," he said with a slight smile. "Coffee is ready if you want some." Catherine accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin. "You did not have to do all this," she said. "I wanted to," Zachary said simply. He plated up breakfast and handed it to her. "Have you thought about my offer?" Catherine took a sip of coffee, gathering her courage. "If we were to become partners, I would want everything in writing, like you said. Legal and binding, drawn up by a lawyer. And I want to understand exactly what our arrangement would be. How would we split the work? How would decisions be made? Zachary nodded, clearly pleased she was considering it seriously. Fair questions. Here is what I propose. For the immediate future, we focus on survival and getting through winter. I ride to White River today, pay off your debt to the bank, and get a lawyer to draw up our partnership agreement. I also bring back my horses and enough supplies to last us through spring. He paused, sipping his own coffee. As for work division, I figure we play to our strengths. I have experience with cattle drives, horse training, and range management. You know this land, know the neighbors, know the local markets. We make major decisions together, equal vote. For day-to-day operations, we each handle what we are best at. And living arrangements. Catherine asked, knowing it was a delicate question but needing to address it. People will talk if we are living together unmarried. Zachary had clearly thought about this. I can sleep in the barn until we build a separate cabin for one of us, or I can hire on a hand or two who can act as chaperones of sorts. Your reputation matters, Miss Dalton. I will not do anything to damage it. Catherine felt a strange flutter in her chest at his consideration. How long would it take to make this ranch profitable again? Honestly? 2 years minimum, maybe 3, Zachary said. First year is about building infrastructure, getting a herd established, making it through the seasons. Second year is about growth. Third year is about profit. But I will not lie to you, it will be hard work. Ranching always is, even in the best circumstances. I am not afraid of hard work, Catherine said quietly. I am afraid of trusting the wrong person again. Zachary set down his coffee and looked at her directly. I cannot make you trust me, Miss Dalton. Trust is earned, not given. But I can promise you this. I will put everything in writing, I will be transparent about every dollar spent and earned, and I will work as hard as any 2 men to make this place succeed. And if at any point you feel I have broken your trust, you can end our partnership and keep whatever we have built together. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She could refuse his offer and face certain ruin, losing everything in a few weeks when the bank foreclosed. Or she could take a chance on this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one night than she had experienced in months. All right, she said finally, but I want to go with you to White River. I want to be there when you pay the bank, and I want to meet with the lawyer myself. Zachary smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I would not have it any other way. We are partners, Miss Dalton. Equal partners. That means you have a say in everything. They finished breakfast quickly and prepared for the journey to White River. Zachary saddled his horse and one of the pack horses for Catherine, and they set out under a bright winter sun. The ride was about 2 hours, following the mountain trails down into the valley where White River sat nestled along the banks of its namesake river. As they rode, Zachary told Catherine more about his background. He was 28 years old, had been working cattle since he was 12, and had learned horse training from an old Mexican vaquero who had taught him everything about reading animals and understanding their behavior. He spoke with quiet passion about ranching, about building something lasting and good, and Catherine found herself drawn to his steady confidence and genuine enthusiasm. For her part, Catherine told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother's herb garden and her father's careful stewardship of the land. She told him about the local families, about the complexities of ranching in Colorado's high country, and about the seasonal challenges they would face. By the time they reached White River, they were talking like old friends rather than strangers, and Catherine felt something she had not felt in weeks: hope. White River was a small but growing town, with a main street lined with businesses and a population of a few hundred souls. Zachary led them first to the bank, where Catherine's heart pounded as they walked through the doors. The banker, Mr. Peterson, looked up with a mixture of surprise and what might have been pity when he saw Catherine. "Miss Dalton," he said carefully, "I did not expect to see you today. Have you come to discuss payment arrangements?" "She has come to pay off the debt in full," Zachary said firmly, stepping up beside Catherine. "I am Zachary Young, Miss Dalton's new business partner. We would like to settle her account today." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, that is unexpected but certainly welcome news. The amount owed is $300, as I believe you know." Zachary pulled out a leather wallet and counted out the money without hesitation, placing it on the counter in neat stacks. Catherine watched in amazement as he did so, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. She was free of the debt. Her ranch was safe, at least for now. Mr. Peterson counted the money carefully and then prepared a receipt. "This settles the account in full," he said, handing the document to Catherine. "I must say, Miss Dalton, you are fortunate to have found a partner so quickly. I was afraid we would have to foreclose by the end of next month." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. They left the bank and walked down the street to the office of Samuel Morrison, the town's lawyer. Zachary explained what they needed, and Mr. Morrison listened carefully before nodding. "I can certainly draw up a partnership agreement," he said. "It will take me a few hours to prepare the documents properly. Might I suggest you return this afternoon?" Zachary agreed, and they left the lawyer's office. As they walked back into the cold morning air, Catherine felt overwhelmed by everything that was happening. Just yesterday, she had been standing in the snow ready to give up, and now her debts were paid, and she was entering into a business partnership with a man who seemed too good to be true. "Thank you," she said quietly, stopping in the middle of the wooden sidewalk. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for this." "You do not have to repay me," Zachary said. "We are partners now. What I invest in the ranch, I invest in our future, both of our futures." There was something in the way he said it that made Catherine's heart skip. She realized suddenly that this man, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, was looking at her not with pity but with respect, and maybe with something more. They spent the next few hours purchasing supplies. Zachary seemed to have an endless list of things they needed: food staples, tools, seed for spring planting, fabric for clothes, medicine, ammunition, and countless other items. He consulted Catherine on everything, asking her opinion and listening carefully to her input. They also stopped at the livery stable, where Zachary made arrangements to bring his 10 horses up to the ranch the following week. By the time they returned to the lawyer's office, Catherine's head was spinning with plans and possibilities. Mr. Morrison had the documents ready, and he went through them carefully, explaining each clause. The agreement was exactly as Zachary had promised: equal partnership, equal split of profits and losses, equal decision-making power. There was even a clause stating that if either party acted in bad faith, the other party would gain full ownership. Catherine signed her name with a hand that trembled slightly, and then Zachary signed his. Mr. Morrison witnessed the signatures and provided them each with a copy of the agreement. "You are now official business partners," he said with a smile. "I wish you both the best of luck." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, the pack horses heavily laden with supplies, Catherine felt as if she was living in a dream. Everything had changed so quickly, so dramatically, that she could hardly process it all. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Zachary Young was a good man, perhaps the best man she had ever met, and she was profoundly grateful he had ridden into her life when he did. The winter months that followed were the hardest Catherine had ever experienced, but also the most fulfilling. Zachary moved into the barn as promised, fixing it up into a surprisingly comfortable living space while respecting Catherine's privacy and reputation. They worked together from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, fixing the house, chopping wood, and preparing for spring. Zachary brought his horses up from White River, and Catherine was impressed by the quality of the animals. He clearly knew how to pick good stock. They were strong, healthy horses with good temperaments, and Zachary handled them with a skill and gentleness that Catherine found mesmerizing to watch. As they worked side by side day after day, Catherine found herself learning more about the man who had become her partner. She learned that he was patient and kind, that he had a dry sense of humor that often surprised her into laughter, and that he was absolutely dedicated to making their ranch succeed. She learned that he sang quietly to himself while working, old cowboy ballads and trail songs. She learned that he was an excellent cook, that he read books by the fire at night, and that he had a deep respect for the land and the animals they cared for. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, Catherine found herself falling in love with him. It happened gradually, like spring coming to the mountains. It was in the way he always asked her opinion before making decisions. It was in how he fixed a loose step on the porch without being asked, knowing she had mentioned it was dangerous. It was in the way he looked at her across the dinner table, his eyes warm and attentive. It was in how he never once made her feel like she owed him anything, even though he had literally saved her life and her home. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the fire after dinner, going over plans for spring planting. Snow was falling outside, soft and quiet, and the house felt warm and safe. Catherine looked up from the paper they were working on and found Zachary watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking how glad I am that I came here that night," Zachary said quietly. "I know the circumstances were terrible and I hate what your brother did to you, but I cannot help feeling grateful that our paths crossed when they did." Catherine felt her cheeks flush. "I am grateful too," she admitted. "You saved me, Zachary, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved yourself," he corrected gently. "You had the strength to keep going, to accept help, to work harder than anyone I have ever known. I just provided some resources and company." "You provided more than that," Catherine said softly. She set down her pen and looked at him directly. "That first night, when you kissed away my frozen tears and told me no more sadness, something changed in me. You made me believe that maybe things could get better, and you have spent every day since proving that belief right." Zachary was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could see something like hope flickering in his eyes. "Catherine," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, "I need to be honest with you about something." Catherine's heart started to pound. "What is it?" "When I proposed our partnership, I meant every word I said about it being a business arrangement," Zachary said carefully. "But I would be lying if I said that was the only reason I wanted to stay. The truth is, from that first moment when I saw you standing in the snow with tears frozen on your face, something in my heart just recognized you. I know that sounds foolish and overly romantic, but it is the truth. These past months working with you, getting to know you, have only confirmed what I felt that first night." He took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you, Catherine Dalton. Maybe I have been since the beginning, and I needed you to know that, even though it might complicate everything." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "It does not complicate anything," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "because I am falling in love with you too." Zachary stood up slowly, crossing the small distance between them. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Then may I court you properly, not just as your business partner but as a man who hopes to win your heart." "You have already won my heart," Catherine said, smiling through her tears. "But yes, I would very much like you to court me." Zachary leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. But Catherine did not want to pull away. She wanted this more than she had wanted anything in a long time. When his lips met hers, it was soft and gentle and full of promise, and Catherine felt as if her entire world had shifted into perfect alignment. When they finally pulled apart, Zachary was smiling, and Catherine realized she could not remember the last time she had felt this happy. "No more sadness," he whispered, echoing his words from that first night. "No more sadness," Catherine agreed, and she knew with absolute certainty that she meant it. Spring came to the mountains in early April, bringing with it an explosion of work and possibility. Zachary had arranged for a small herd of 30 cattle to be delivered, a modest start but a good foundation to build on. They spent long days repairing pasture fences, digging irrigation channels, and planting crops for winter feed. Their courtship continued through the busy months, stolen moments of tenderness in the midst of hard work. Zachary was unfailingly respectful of Catherine's reputation, always careful to maintain proper boundaries, but the love between them grew deeper with each passing day. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings, Zachary's arm around Catherine's shoulders, watching the sun set over the mountains and making plans for their future. In June, on a warm evening when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows, Zachary asked Catherine to take a walk with him after dinner. They wandered down to the creek that ran through their property, the water high and rushing from snowmelt, and sat on a flat boulder warmed by the day's sun. "Catherine," Zachary said, taking her hand in his, "these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. Working with you, building this ranch together, falling more in love with you every single day, it has been everything I never knew I needed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This ring was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I would be honored beyond measure if you would consent to be my wife." Catherine looked at the ring, a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire, and felt tears streaming down her face. But this time they were tears of absolute joy. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left them both breathless. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you so much, Catherine." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than I ever thought possible." They were married in August in a simple ceremony in White River, with most of the town turning out to witness the union. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Zachary had bought her, and Zachary wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed to perfection. Mr. Morrison stood as witness, along with several of the neighboring ranchers who had become friends over the past months. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the ranch. The neighbors had pitched in to provide food and drink, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Catherine felt as if her heart would burst with happiness as she danced with her new husband under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed her despair just 9 months earlier. That night, Zachary carried Catherine over the threshold of their house, which they had spent weeks fixing up and making beautiful. He set her down gently in their bedroom, and they came together as husband and wife for the first time, a joining that was tender and passionate and absolutely right. The years that followed were full of hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch grew steadily under their joint stewardship. By their second anniversary, they had expanded their cattle herd to over 100 head, had built a new barn, and were making a profit for the first time. Zachary's expertise with horses brought in additional income as he trained animals for sale, and for neighboring ranchers. Catherine proved to be an astute businesswoman, managing their accounts and contracts with skill. She also developed a reputation for her herb garden and natural remedies, providing medicine to their neighbors and earning extra income through her knowledge. But the greatest joy came in their third year of marriage, when Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Zachary was beside himself with excitement, treating Catherine as if she were made of glass despite her insistence that she was perfectly capable of continuing to work. Their son was born in March of 1882, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Douglas after Catherine's father, and Zachary held him with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Catherine as she lay exhausted but happy in their bed. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "Thank you," Catherine said softly, reaching up to touch his face, "for saving me that night, for kissing away my frozen tears, for showing me that happiness was possible again." 2 years later, their daughter was born, a beautiful baby girl they named Rose after Zachary's mother. And 3 years after that, another son whom they named Thomas, a gesture of forgiveness for Catherine's brother who had never returned or attempted contact. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Zachary and Catherine were known as fair employers, good neighbors, and devoted parents. They built a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and partnership, and the kind of success that comes from two people working together toward a common dream. Catherine's brother Thomas did eventually return, 10 years after his betrayal, broken and desperate, having gambled away everything he had stolen. He came to the ranch expecting rejection, perhaps even hoping for it as a kind of punishment he felt he deserved. Instead, Catherine and Zachary gave him a job as a ranch hand, a chance to rebuild his life and prove he could be a better man. It was not easy, and trust had to be earned slowly, but over time, Thomas proved himself worthy of the second chance he had been given. He became a devoted uncle to Catherine's children, and eventually married a schoolteacher from White River, settling down and finding his own path to redemption. On their 10th anniversary, Catherine and Zachary stood together on the porch of their house, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to everything they had built together. "You ever think about that night?" Catherine asked quietly. "When you first arrived and found me standing in the snow, every day," Zachary admitted. "It was the best night of my life, even though you were suffering so much. Because it was the night I found you, the night I found my purpose and my home and the love of my life." Catherine leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her waist. "I think about it too. I think about how close I came to giving up completely. And then you appeared out of nowhere, like an answer to a prayer I had not even thought to say. I kissed away your frozen tears and told you no more sadness," Zachary said softly. "And I have spent every day since trying to keep that promise." "You have," Catherine said, turning to look up at him with eyes full of love. "You absolutely have. We have built something wonderful here, Zachary, not just the ranch, but our life together, our family, our love. And we will keep building it," Zachary promised, "for the rest of our lives." As the years continued to pass, that promise held true. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market downturns and personal challenges, but they faced everything together, their partnership and love never wavering. They watched their children grow up strong and capable, passing on the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion that had defined their own lives. Douglas, their eldest, became a skilled horseman like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business, and her father's way with animals, and she eventually married a young rancher from a neighboring property, expanding their family's reach and influence in the region. Young Thomas showed an aptitude for mechanics and innovation, always looking for new ways to improve their operations and modernize their equipment. Zachary and Catherine became beloved figures in White River and the surrounding area, known for their generosity and wisdom. They helped establish a school in the region, donated land for a church, and were always ready to lend a hand to neighbors in need. The memory of their own struggles and the kindness that had saved them made them determined to be that source of help for others whenever possible. On their 20th anniversary, the entire community came together to celebrate. There was a huge party at the ranch, with food and music and dancing, and speeches honoring the couple who had become pillars of their community. Catherine looked around at the faces of their children, now grown, at their friends and neighbors, at the ranch they had built from nothing, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Catherine and Zachary walked together down to the creek, just as they had on the night he proposed. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light across the water. 20 years, Catherine said softly. 20 years since you appeared out of the darkness and saved my life. You saved mine too, Zachary said. I was lost, Catherine, wandering around looking for something I could not name, and then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? Catherine asked. After you kissed away my frozen tears. No more sadness, Zachary said immediately, and I meant it with everything in me. You kept that promise, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face now, but happy tears, joyful tears. Every single day you have kept that promise. You gave me a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her close. We gave each other that life, he corrected gently. Everything we have, we built together. Equal partners, remember, Catherine laughed through her tears. Equal partners, she agreed, in business and in love and in everything that matters. They stood there by the creek for a long time, holding each other under the moonlight. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had created something beautiful and lasting from that chance meeting. As they grew older, they gradually handed more responsibility to their children, though they remained active and involved in the ranch operations well into their 60s. They took pleasure in watching their grandchildren grow up, passing on the stories of how the ranch came to be, of the frozen tears and the promise of no more sadness. Zachary remained strong and capable until his 72nd year, when a riding accident resulted in injuries that, while not immediately fatal, marked the beginning of his decline. Catherine nursed him through those final months with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their life together, never leaving his side, making sure he was comfortable and surrounded by love. On a warm summer evening, with Catherine holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around, Zachary Young took his last breath. His final words were for Catherine, the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for over 40 years. No more sadness, he whispered, echoing the promise he had made so long ago. Promise me, Catherine, no more sadness. Celebrate the life we had. Celebrate the love we shared. I promise, Catherine said through her tears. I promise, my love, and she kept that promise. Though she grieved deeply for the loss of her husband, Catherine did not let sadness consume her. She continued to be active in the ranch, continued to be a strong presence for her children and grandchildren, continued to embody the strength and resilience that had defined her entire life. She lived another 8 years after Zachary's death, years filled with family and purpose and quiet contentment. She told the story of their first meeting countless times, always emphasizing the moment when Zachary had kissed away her frozen tears and promised her no more sadness. It became a family legend, a tale passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can appear when you least expect it. Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, surrounded by the family she and Zachary had created together. She was buried next to her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built, under a large cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first spring. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each new steward adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Zachary and Catherine had laid. The tale of how it all began, of the cowboy who appeared out of a winter night to save a desperate woman, of frozen tears kissed away and a promise of no more sadness, became part of the family's identity and heritage. And in White River, Colorado, where the story had truly begun, people still spoke of Zachary and Catherine Young decades after they were gone. They spoke of a love that had transformed two broken people into something stronger together than they ever could have been apart. They spoke of partnership and hard work and the kind of devotion that builds legacies. But most of all, they spoke of that first night when a cowboy kissed away frozen tears and made a promise that he spent the rest of his life keeping. No more sadness. It was a promise that echoed through the years, a reminder that love, real and true and deep, has the power to heal even the most broken hearts and create something beautiful from the darkest despair. The ranch stood for over 100 years as a testament to their love, eventually becoming a historical landmark that drew visitors from across the country. The house was preserved, the barn where Zachary had first lived was restored, and the hill where they were buried became a place where people came to pay their respects to a couple whose love story had become legend. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes bring their own children to the ranch, standing on that same porch where Catherine and Zachary had stood so many times, looking out over land that still bore the mark of their care and vision. And they would tell the story again, keeping it alive for a new generation. They would tell about the frozen tears on a bitter winter night, about a promise made and kept, about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built a life that exceeded every dream. They would tell about love that endured through hardship and celebrated through joy, about partnership that meant true equality and mutual respect. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the stars shone bright and clear over the Colorado mountains, it was easy to imagine that Catherine and Zachary were still there somehow, still watching over the land they had loved, still embodying the promise that had started it all. No more sadness. It was more than just words spoken on a desperate night. It was a philosophy, a commitment, a way of living. It meant facing challenges with courage, celebrating victories with gratitude, and always choosing love over fear, hope over despair, partnership over isolation. The story of Catherine Dalton and Zachary Young became more than just a family history. It became an inspiration, a reminder that second chances are possible, that strangers can become soulmates, and that the darkest nights can give way to the brightest dawns. Their love story was not perfect or without struggle, but it was real and it was true, and it changed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touched. From the children they raised to the community they served to the generations that followed, their legacy lived on in countless ways, all stemming from that single moment when a cowboy chose compassion over indifference, action over apathy. When Zachary Young had ridden up to that dark ranch house on that freezing December night in 1878, he could not have known that he was about to meet the love of his life. When he saw Catherine standing there with tears frozen on her cheeks, He simply knew that he had to help, that he could not ride away and leave her to face her despair alone. And in that choice, in that moment of unexpected kindness, he had changed everything. He had saved a life, found a partner, built a legacy, and created a love story that would endure long after both of them were gone. The promise he made that night, no more sadness, was not a promise that life would be easy or without challenges. It was a promise that she would never face those challenges alone again, that they would build something together that was stronger than any hardship, that love would be their foundation and their strength. And for over 40 years, through every season and every storm, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and setback, Zachary Young kept that promise. He loved Catherine with unwavering devotion, partnered with her in complete equality, and built with her a life that was rich in every way that mattered. Catherine, for her part, had transformed from a broken, desperate woman on the verge of giving up into a strong, capable, loving force who helped shape not just her own destiny, but the destiny of everyone around her. She had taken the second chance Zachary offered her and made the most of it, proving that resilience and grace could triumph over betrayal and loss. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, a testament to what is possible when two people commit themselves fully to each other and to a shared vision. Their story became a beacon of hope for others facing their own darkness, a reminder that unexpected help can come when you need it most, and that love, real love, has the power to transform everything. And so the story of the frozen tears lived on, told and retold, embellished but never losing its essential truth. It lived on in the land they had nurtured, in the family they had created, in the community they had helped build. It lived on as a reminder that in the wild, hard landscape of the American West, where survival often seemed paramount and gentleness a luxury, there was still room for compassion, for love, for promises kept. On cold winter nights throughout Colorado, when the stars shone bright and the air was cold enough to freeze tears on your cheeks, people would sometimes think of Zachary and Catherine Young. They would remember the story of how love appeared out of darkness, how a simple act of kindness changed two lives forever, and how a promise made in desperation became the foundation for a legacy that endured for generations. No more sadness. 3 simple words spoken with conviction on a bitter night became a life lived fully, and a love that never faded. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the wealth or even the family, as important as those were, but the simple, profound truth that love, when it is real and true and deep, can heal any wound and light up even the darkest night. The story of Catherine Dalton and Zachary Young, the woman with frozen tears and the cowboy who kissed them away, lived on not because it was unique or unusual, but because it was fundamentally human. It spoke to the universal longing for connection, for partnership, for love that sees us at our worst and chooses to stay anyway. And so, in the end, their story was not just their own. It belonged to everyone who heard it, everyone who needed to believe that second chances were possible, that kindness still existed in a hard world, and that love, real love, could appear when you needed it most and transform everything. The ranch still stood, weathered but strong, a physical reminder of what two people could build together. The hill where they were buried overlooked it all, and visitors often said that standing there, you could feel something special in the air, something that transcended time and touched the heart. Perhaps it was just imagination, or perhaps it was something more. Perhaps love like theirs left an imprint on the world, a mark that lingered long after the people themselves were gone. Perhaps promises kept and devotion lived echoed through the years in ways we could not fully understand, but could still somehow feel. Whatever the case, the story endured, passed down through generations. A tale of the Wild West that was not about gunfights or outlaws or adventure, but about something far more powerful and lasting. Two people who found each other in darkness and created light, who faced the world together and never looked back, who built a love that became legend. And in White River, Colorado, and throughout the surrounding mountains and valleys, when winter came and the air grew cold enough to freeze tears on your cheeks, people remembered. They remembered the cowboy and the promise he made. They remembered the woman who had the strength to accept help and the courage to love again. They remembered that even in the hardest times, in the coldest nights, love could appear and change everything. No more sadness. It was a promise, a commitment, a way of life. And in the story of Catherine and Zachary Young, it was a promise gloriously, completely, beautifully kept.